a few words before I introduce Catherine to the effect about how important formal methods have become in many things other than things that we need to think about. Okay? So I run into them in areas such as biology, because I'm trying to use formal methods now, including traditional things like calculus methods to understand reverse engineering biology. That's why we had some speakers last year on that subject. Formal methods, of course, they are very important for embedded systems and design. And they become more and more important for things like control engineering when you try to do both the logic part of the control and the calculus supervision of the control. And they have become extremely important in security, of course, and it becomes extremely important in communication protocols where both started. So we knew about Catherine's work for many of the papers that we read here when we started working on formal methods to try to understand various forms of security and develop automatic ways of checking security algorithms and so on. So we're very happy she's here today, and she has a very great record in this area. She's actually heading the formal methods group at Naval, and she was the first professional designer of the very well-known NRF protocol analyzer that some of you have read in the papers. And she has actually used this kind of method to think that they're very practical, working in the Internet Engineering Task Force of various protocols, including IKE and the GDOI. She's has been a program chair for various conferences in security, and she's very active in many of these areas where there's interface between formal methods and security and protocol verification and these kinds of techniques. So, and it's interesting to see, as I say to many of you, that you need a rather strong mathematical background to get into this area. So, and if you look at, for instance, BA in mathematics and PhD in mathematics, you're working in this kind of protocol analyzer. So, thank you for coming.
Thank you. Okay, well, what I'm going to talk about is, as Dr. Barris pointed out, is a particular application of formal methods to the analysis of cryptographic protocols. And just before I get into the talk, I just want to give you a little background into what this actually means. So I'm going to be looking at a cryptographic protocol and not necessarily analyzing the cryptography that's used in the protocol. We assume that the cryptography is sound. We do model things such as encryption and decryption, but they're modeled as sort of atomic operations. What you can do is, since you model them as discrete operations, you can build a formal model of this that can be analyzed in various standard model checkers and theorem provers. And so what you do is you build a specification of the protocol itself, and also the actions of an intruder who can perform all the operations, and also has the added ability to if he gets a message, he can refuse to pass it on, he can alter messages, create his own messages, and so forth. So so what you have is this sort of discrete system you can analyze. And it turns out there are many problems, and we're going to be seeing some, that can arise in cryptographic protocols that can be found, that exist on this level. And as a matter of fact, it's quite easy for these problems to arise, because when you're specifying a protocol, a cryptographic protocol, you're specifying a distributed system that's operating in this very hostile environment. And this means that this has become a very popular area of research in the formal methods community. If you have any sort of formal methods tool, one of the things you want to try it out on is cryptographic protocols. And there's also been a lot of work in trying to determine what sort of various sort of decidability properties and so forth. But what I've actually been trying to do in this project I'm going to talk about is to say, well, we have these tools now. What can we do? How can we use these to help people who are developing crypto protocols? And So at the time I was started off in this project, which is a few years ago, there wasn't there was a large area of quite a large body of research that had been done, but there wasn't, and people had actually applied these to some serious sized protocols. I mean, some real life protocols. And some quite complex protocols, but it had been usually somebody would take a protocol that had already been developed, apply their techniques to it, and occasionally they'd find some problems, but it would really be too late to help the protocol designers much. And what we'd like to do, of course, is to make these methods actually useful to designers, so you can catch the errors before they wind up in the fielded product. So that's what we tried to do. So our plan was we worked with the Internet Engineering Task Force, a standards group, and our plan was to work closely with the standards developers as they drafted their standard and give feedback as early in the standardization process as possible, to discuss any problems we found as they arose and fix them. And so a bit about the group we work with. Okay, the Internet Engineering Task Force, this is mostly a volunteer standards group that's responsible for Internet protocol standards. And it's made up of different working groups that are concentrating on standards for different protocols. And we worked in particular with a sister group, the Internet Research Task Force. And what they do is they work on research problems, but particularly very focused research problems that are of interest to the IETF. And the group we worked with was called the Secure Multicast Working Group, which abbreviates very nicely to SMUG. And they were looking at problems associated with secure multicast. So the idea was, we want a secure multicast protocol, but we don't really know how to design one yet. So we're going to go off and do some research. And in the process of the research, they were going to come up with some recommendations for standards. So this made this made a very nice way to get involved with the group, because in general the IETF works is generally under the gun to get things out, while the IRTF had somewhat more time to look at their research problem. So what I'll talk about today is how we worked with the SMUG working group. The protocol we worked on, which has actually kind of non-intuitive name, the Group Domain of Interpretation. When I'm not even going to try to explain that, but it's abbreviated as GDOI. I'll give a little background on formal methods for crypto protocol analysis and the tool we use, the NRL Protocol Analyzer, and some technical challenges we faced and the outcome, and then also a coda, which describes what happened when we went back and looked at the protocol again early this year. So how did we work with SMUG? Well, we attended their meetings regularly. They generally had like about 6 meetings a year. And we looked at the different protocols they were developing, and we picked one, the GDOI, as a good candidate simply because it was based on a protocol that already existed, the Internet Key Exchange. So it was a very concrete protocol, which made it a lot easier to develop a formal model for. Some of the other protocols would rely on other unspecified protocols for services, and so that made it that would give you the added challenge of trying to figure out what the service was and trying to formalize it. While with GDOI, I could just go back and look and see, well, what does Internet Key Exchange or IKE supply, and then I'd know. And then we, as the group worked on GDOI, they come out with various internet drafts, and we use this as the basis for formal specification as they came out. And if we found any problems or ambiguities, we discussed them with the authors, and that would often be incorporated in the new drafts. So now a little bit about GDOI. Here is the basic architecture. Let's see, so how does the pointer work? Is there? Okay, great. Okay. So there's this button. Oh, it's up here. Okay, so there's 3 parties, and actually in the basic architecture they had 3 parties, but what finally came out in the draft was just 2 parties, so I'll talk about those. There's the GCKS, which stands for Group Controller Key Server, and then there's a group member. And then there's sort of 3 levels of key here. There's SA Security Association in the IKE parlance. Security Association stands basically for key and all the information that's associated with, such as algorithm, key lifetime, and so forth. So we have the first security association is a pairwise key that's shared between the GCKS and the member, and this is actually set up before the member joins the group. Okay, and this is what's set up with the Internet Key Exchange Protocol. Then there's something called SA2, or the key encryption key, and this is used to encrypt traffic encryption keys, which are actually going to be used to encrypt traffic. So we got sort of like 3 levels of keys here. And in GDOI, we assume that this first SA1 is already there, and GDOI describes how SA2 and SA3 get distributed. Okay, so what the GDOI does, it facilitates the distribution of group keys by this GCKS. It's based, I said, on IKE, when IKE itself is based on another protocol, which is ISA-KMP. So you use IKE to distribute your SA1s. Then there are 2 protocols. One is called the Group Key Pull Protocol, and that's initiated by a member who wants to join the group. And that's sort of like a handshake protocol, a pairwise protocol, in which the member gets the current key encryption key, and he can also get some traffic encryption keys as well. And then there's something called the Group Key Push Datagram, which is a message that's sent by the GCKS to the group as a whole, and that contains like new category, new key encryption keys and new traffic encryption keys. And here's the protocol sort of in a nutshell. This asterisk here means everything after this asterisk is encrypted, and with the shared key SA1 between the member and the GCKS. Okay, so they use the key that was distributed under IKE to encrypt this. So the member starts out, he sends a nonce, and he sends an ID, and this ID is the ID of the group. Okay, so he's saying basically, I want to join this group. The GCKS sends back a nonce, its own nonce, and then something called a security association here, except this security association contains all the information about the security association except the key itself. And the reason it's done this way is because the GCKS wants to make sure that this is a live request and not just a replay, let's say by an attacker, before he actually sends the key. Okay, so he's going to wait until he gets a response back to his nonce challenge here. So the member responds, and you notice there's actually not necessarily any new information in this response, but there is some optional information. This includes a Diffie-Hellman, part of a Diffie-Hellman key exchange, that's optional, and also something called proof of possession, which is also optional, but it actually turned out a lot of the problems that we found with this came out of proof of possession, because this proof of possession turned out to be something a little different and new. But basically the idea here is this certificate is it contains a public key, and the member needs to prove ownership of this public key. So what he does here is he uses the corresponding private key in this proof of possession to sign the two nonces, NI and NR. And also he has it, but that's optional. He also has this hash over NI over the two nonces, so and over the optional Diffie-Hellman and over the optional proof of possession. And of course, because he's taken a hash, this is a keyed hash. So this is actually this actually authenticates the response. So the responder knows at this point that he's got a live request. And then in the fourth message, if he got a first part of a Diffie-Hellman exchange, he sends his own part. There's also an optional proof of possession for the GCKS. There's the key itself. This stands for key download. And then there's a sequence number. And the sequence number is actually attached to the group key push message or group key push datagram, the sequence number is incremented every time one of these is sent, and this just is the current sequence number. So this tells the member which group key push message to expect. So he'll know to throw out any old group key push messages he gets. Okay, so that's the group key pull protocol. Then down here in the group key push message, this is encrypted with the current key encryption key. It's sent by the GCKS to everybody, all the group members. It contains a sequence number, which is incremented every time a new one is sent. It contains the current security association, new security association and new keys. It contains a certificate, optional, and it's signed by the GCKS. So the key itself, since it's a group key, is not enough to authenticate this message as coming from the GCKS, of course. One thing here is I want to point out, I'm not going to talk about this an awful lot, but this key download can contain a new key encryption key as well. And it's normally not considered very safe to send out new keys encrypted under old keys. Because basically what you're doing here is you're relying on a key encryption key that's about to be obsolete to protect the new key encryption key. And there are actually ways to get around this, which we didn't try and model in our analysis. This was a little beyond what our tool was able to do at the time. But I just wanted to say a little bit about how this is done. This is one way you can do it, but actually these group key protocols use something called a key hierarchy, and this is an example. And the idea is, suppose if somebody is expelled or leaves, and you want them to prevent them from learning any new key encryption keys, which they could if you just encrypted the new key under the old key. So what you do is you have this hierarchy. This is actually the key encryption key. It's encrypted under two keys. So this circle stands for encryption under some key K14, and this describes encryption under some other key, and then these keys are in turn. Oops, I'm not aiming very well here. see. Oh, there it is. And then this key is encrypted under this key and so forth. And then finally, let's say this guy U1 is going to get this key encrypted under this key encrypted under this key, and then K12 encrypted under K1. And so what happens when U1 leaves? Well, the GCKS computes a new K prime, a new K14 prime, and a new K12 prime. He basically computes a new path, and then U2 is going to get K prime encrypted under K14 prime, K14 prime encrypted under K12 prime, and K12 prime encrypted under K2. And U3 will get K prime encrypted under K14 prime, K14 prime encrypted under K34, so he gets. And then the other new members will just get K prime encrypted under K58. Okay. So, so the idea here is this changes the problem of getting new keys out from an n squared problem to a log n problem. And then the idea is under your group key push datagram, you don't just send K, you send all this encrypted stuff here, and then the members decrypt the appropriate things. And this is not specified in GDOI, but GDOI is designed to be compatible with this stuff. And so the idea is you could take, there's a bunch of different ways of building these key hierarchies. Some of them use encryption, some of them use hashes. Yeah?
Why can't U4 get the ether to 4 equal to prime?
Okay. Okay, so why can't U4, okay, so what he'll have to get is, okay, so he'll get, yeah, you're right, he'll get K14 prime encrypted under K34 here, and then K prime encrypted under K14 prime.
Okay.
Yeah.
So U5 to the U8 can change also, right? Because of the K prime or no?
Wait, so wait.
So K prime changed, so
yeah.
Will this affect U5 to the U8?
Okay, so K prime changes. Yeah, the only things that change are these things. Okay, because U1 left, and you want to get rid of his path. And then, so what you look is, you know, where does everybody come in on this path? Well, so U4 comes in this way, and so he would get, you know, he would get K prime encrypted with K14 prime, and then K14 prime encrypted with K34. On the other hand, U8 out here doesn't come into the path until all the way up to K prime. So he'd just get K prime encrypted under K58.
So you're both right.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I don't want to belabor this too much because this is sort of, so I've noticed I've got a typo here. That should be K68 down there, not K58. But I don't want to belabor this too much because this is kind of out of the scope of our analysis, but I just wanted to point out that the GDOI does rely on these techniques to securely distribute keys so that principals who leave don't find out new keys.
So does that reliance show up anywhere in GDOI?
There may be a reference, but
does it affect the structure of the GDOI protocol?
No, it doesn't. I mean, because basically what you do is you take this information and you put it in the group key push datagram. And
this dictates the way you might use GDOI.
Yeah, yeah.
It's contain the push button.
Yeah.
This is so much mostly for economy of communication.
Yeah, yeah.
You don't want to change the keys.
Yeah, because otherwise what you'd have to do is let's say you'd have to give each, you'd have to take the pairwise key and encrypt the new key under each pairwise key. So you'd be sending n new keys or n pieces of data here you're sending login pieces of data.
You have to make sure that in the immediate layers that have different keys, because that's the mistake that the IBM group that we found out and we pointed out to them. And then
Actually, actually, I guess my typo. That's a typo. That's I'm not trying to implement it with. Okay, so that's GDOI. So now I want to talk about the NRL protocol analyzer.
Before you go into that, if I understand correctly, the fork is not necessary, right? This is extra, the proof of property, the proof of possession. But you don't have to use it all the time.
No.
So this is for extra protection or something.
Yeah. And as it turns out, but it turned out that well, it had a lot of interesting properties, and I'll get into that soon. Okay, so the NRL protocol analyzer. Well, it's a formal methods tool for verifying security properties of cryptographic protocols, and for finding attacks. And the idea is that the user specifies a protocol in terms of a set of communicating state machines. But they're communicating not just by any regular medium. It's a medium controlled by a hostile intruder, and the hostile intruder can do the things. There's sort of a standard list of things hostile intruders can do. They can intercept traffic, they can create their own traffic, they can delete traffic, and they can perform any set of operations that's available to all the honest principals. And what you do is you specify an insecure state. The NRL protocol analyzer does backward search, and you work backwards from that state and see if you can generate an attack. But the problem is, of course, that you can get an infinite search space here because there's really no limit on what the intruder can do. He can just keep on. The intruder can do any sort of arbitrary sequence of actions, and but there's some techniques built in to limit the size of the search space. You can prove these inductive lemmas, and then so what you do is, first of all, you specify your protocol and you prove your lemmas, and the tool offers a fair amount of automated support for this, although you do need some input from the user. And then you go back and you specify your insecure state and search backwards. Okay. So what's the model it uses? Well, pretty much what I said. Your honest principles are modeled as communicating state machine. There's something what I describe as a Dole-Biao adversary, which is just what I said a few seconds ago. Dishonest principles are considered part of the adversary. So dishonest principles, basically what this model says is, I'm a dishonest principal. I just turn over all my information, including my secret keys, to the adversary, and the adversary does what he likes with it.
So I could model this way, colluding.
Yeah.
Dishonest principles.
Yeah. The thing that's tricky to model here is, suppose you have a dishonest principal who's colluding, but there's certain things the dishonest principal won't do because it's in its own it's not in its own best interest. So you can't do that. What you can model here is principles that'll just do anything, and then they become part of this arbitrary Dole-Biao adversary. Now, each run of a protocol, so a principal can do a number of executions of a protocol, and each run is assigned a unique round number, and that allows you to distinguish between different runs that the principal engages in. So this allows you to multiple runs by the same principal, and
you can do it iterative type of games.
Yeah.
If I want to have an attack which uses an iterative kind of game, I can do that here.
Yeah. As in fact, a lot of attacks involve sort of interleaving two different executions that should be independent. Right. So it's important to be able to do this. And also, let's see what else. Yeah, also different principals can take on different roles. So, for example, if you have a protocol that involves, say, an initiator and a responder, you might have that the principal could take on both the initiator and the responder role. And sometimes you'll have attacks that relies on the same principal taking on both roles. So that's. Now, I want to talk about something. This is very. This idea of events is very important for reasoning about the properties, specifying the properties we want to prove. And now each state transition in an inter-rel protocol analyzer specification is assigned or can be assigned an event. I mean, the ones we care about, we assign events to. And basically the way you model it, it's a function symbol marked by event. It's got 5 arguments. One is the principal doing the transition. The second one is a set, and actually that's not really a set, it's a sequence of other parties involved in the transition. So for example, if you have a protocol that involves an initiator and responder, P could be the name of the initiator, Q could be the identity of the responder, T is the name of the transition rule, L is, again, I have set of words, that should be a sequence of words relative to the transition. So for example, if the protocol involves exchanging a key, you might want to put that key in that sequence L. And if it also involves, let's say, exchanging a couple of nonces, you might want to put those nonces in too. So it's up to the specification writer what goes in here. And N is the local round number that I referred to. Now we use this as sort of input into something we call N-Patrol. And N-Patrol is a language for specifying requirements we're going to give to the NRL protocol analyzer, and it stands for NRL protocol analyzer temporal requirements language. So here, requirements are characterized in terms of these event statements I described in the last slide. There's some specific learn events that involve acquisition of information by the adversary. Which are not, you don't specify, you don't put in your specification, but are sort of generated by the tool. And the syntax of N-Patrol is a little different from the NPA language. And what happens is you lose the event function symbol, and what you do is you take the description of the event and put it outside here. And this actually maps to event statements in the NRL protocol analyzer language, and it's possible actually it could map, you could have one of these mapped to more than one event statement, or you could have more than one of these mapped to the same event statement. Okay. The language has the usual logical connectives, so you have not, and, or, and implies. I don't know why or isn't there, but it should be. And then you have one temporal operator that means happens before, and that's indicated by this diamond with a minus in it that we call minus diamond.
Do you have actual values of time, or is just before and after that?
Just before and after.
So can that be extended to actually use wait out, something like that, with a variable?
Yeah, not the NRL protocol analyzer doesn't do that. And the reason we chose this particular language is we wanted something that fit in well with the NRL protocol analyzer. And most of the protocols we're looking at, the notion of recency, the idea of recency is based on nonces, exchanging nonces. So you know that, if you get something with a nonce in it, you know that it happened, after you sent the nonce. Yeah, and so we don't, So this isn't very good. If you want to reason about something involving timestamps, you're going to need more than this, because timestamps, you know, you're worried about what, and there are some very interesting protocols now involving timestamps that use them in quite subtle ways. Okay, so here's an input role requirement which says if an honest A accepts a key for communication with an honest B, then the server must have generated and sent the key for an honest A and an honest B to use. And I should say that, as you can see, there's this typo. I keep on not fixing that X, capital X, shouldn't be an honest. So this is saying if user A honest, so the idea here is this thing is actually a variable that that is, you can have a variable here that can be set either to honest or dishonest. So this would be user A honest, user B honest. He's accepting a key. This in question mark means this happens in some round, but we don't care what round it is. So this is sort of like a wild card. Then sometimes in the past, the server sent that key to A and B. And again, this is a wild card, so this is some round, you know, not necessarily this round because these are two different entities, but we don't care what it is. Okay, so that's a very simple requirement. But that
the X should be what?
The X should be honest because we've got an honest A and an honest B here. Okay. The way we usually model requirements in this language, and this isn't the way everybody does it, but it's in general we this is sort of the standard set of requirements that people use when looking at especially NOTS-based authentication protocols. You have secrecy requirements. So this basically means that the intruder shouldn't learn secrets except under certain failure conditions. So an example for GDOI, you know, an intruder could learn the secret if the intruder joined the group. Okay, so we're not so there are certain conditions in which the intruder could learn the secret, but there's other conditions, you know, which we would expect the intruder not to be able to learn the secret. Authentication requirements, these are usually something on the form. If A accepts a message as coming from B intended for some purpose X, you know, like it's a key or contains a key or whatever, then B should have sent that message to A and intended it for purpose X. And the third we call freshness requirements, and these are conditions on recency and or the uniqueness of accepted messages. So A might care about not only does this message come from B, but is it recent? Now, in some models used by some tools, people bundle freshness and authentication together and call them correspondence. So and it really kind of depends on, you know, what approach you're taking and what and how you're going to formulate your properties. But basically, you know, we're all talking about the same thing. How do you use your analysis using NPA and InPatrol? Well, first of all, you have to take these event statements, InPatrol event statements, and you map them to you set up some way in which they're mapped to events in an NRL protocol analyzer and specification. So you're interpreting your atomic formulas, NRL protocol analyzer state transitions. And now remember, the way you use NPA is it's a backward search. You take an insecure state and you work backwards. So what you have to do is you take the negation of your requirement, your temporal requirement, and this defines a state that should be unreachable if and only if the requirement's satisfied. And then you try to use NPA to prove that that state is unreachable. And if you can't, well, hopefully you're going to show how that goal could be reached from an initial state and then you'll have found an attack. One of the first things we did when we came up with this language is we built a set of requirement suites for some sort of standard protocols, two-party key distribution protocols, two-party key agreement protocols for using Diffie-Hellman. And we also, we looked we went to the other extreme. We picked the most complex protocol we could find, which is secure electronic transactions. It's a standards, it's a standard that was put out by the credit card companies, I guess, originally almost 10 years ago. And it never really caught on because just it was so incredibly complicated, but it was a wonderful sort of, if you had some sort of specification language or tool, it was a wonderful place to go and see if it really worked, because you just couldn't get more complicated than this. So we did a requirement specification for a portion of SET, actually. So that basically describes NPA and InPatrol. And so I want to talk about now about how we how much time do I have, actually? Because
you have time.
Okay.
20 more minutes, 25 minutes.
Okay. So I want to talk now about how we specified this, and what portions we did specify. So we assume that the protocol starts with a GCKS creating a group and a group key. And at any time after that, a group member may request to join the group by initiating a group key pull exchange. And the GCKS responds by completing the protocol. And at any other time after that, any of the following may occur. Well, actually, we didn't try to model expelling, so I should really take that out. But we do have a group member could initiate a new phase 2 exchange. A group member could send keys. A GCKS could send keys to the group member using group key push datagram. And also, I should say, a GCKS can create more than one group, so he could actually have several groups going. And our initial specification took a little under a week to write. But before we went, okay, so here's what the structure of the specification looks like. The group member chooses a group, and then he can either initiate the group key push protocol, and that's request key, and then afterwards he can start receiving these, pull protocol, and then afterwards he can start receiving these push messages. The GCKS can create a group. He creates keys, and as he's creating keys, he's also responding to key requests from new members and also sending push messages. And he can create more than one group, and the member can join more than one group too. We left out a bunch of stuff. We didn't try to deal with the key hierarchies,
This wouldn't be the problem, right?
It certainly wouldn't be a problem to specify. There's a problem we ran into, and this was just, the limits of what the tool can do, not necessarily any theoretical limits, that it's an unbounded data structure, and the NRL protocol analyzer was designed with bounded data structures in mind. So you can have like an arbitrary, intruder who can do an arbitrary number of things, principals who can engage in an arbitrary number of executions, but the data structures they're dealing with are bounded in size.
And I cannot get by just doing this recursively?
The way it's set up now, no. Okay. I mean, you could specify it in the NRL protocol analyzer, I think, quite easily, but it just doesn't have the machinery to tell you anything useful about it.
The other thing I wanted to ask you is, if I have written my protocol in some language,
yeah,
can I automatically translate in your language?
You should be able to. I don't see why not. In fact, it's been done with a high-level language called, oh, what was it called? Well, actually, there's two, Capsule, yeah, which was, I don't remember what it stands for, but it was done by, this was a language built by John Millen, was at MITRE and is now at SRI. And, yeah, oh, okay, well, he can tell you about it. And we actually had two translations, one straight from Capsule to NRL Protocol Analyzer, and one from an intermediate language. Actually, what was kind of interesting was the straight translation was a lot easier to do than the one from the intermediate language, but because the intermediate language made a lot of assumptions that were different from the assumptions NRL Protocol Analyzer made. But anyway, so it can't handle these unbounded data structures just because, you know, but I don't see any reason why somebody couldn't build a tool that does. I don't really think it's, and people are looking into these problems more now. And also, so we didn't try to specify key hierarchies. We also, in the key downloads can actually contain an arbitrary set of keys. You can put in as many keys as you like into a key download. So we assumed that there was just a few possibilities. So we could have like one key encryption key, one traffic encryption key, or both. And we didn't include IKE phase 1 because IKE phase 1 is just huge. So we assume, you know, these guys have these keys they got from IKE phase 1, and we aren't going to care about how they got them. But what we did include was they use a lot of the formatting, they inherit the way they format data from IKE phase 1. And we did model that, and that actually got us some interesting results. So, and then we tried to develop some in-patrol requirements, which, and that actually turned out to be a big challenge. Because we'd done this for all sorts of pairwise protocols, you know, where Alice and Bob have to exchange a key or get it from a server. And, you know, so we had the problem pretty well down for that. But we ran into some problems, you know, this didn't transfer automatically into crypto, into group protocols. And the main problem was in pairwise protocols, you have a notion of a session. So secrecy means the keys aren't learned by parties who aren't involved in the session. So secrecy, that's very easy to specify. You have Alice and Bob and they share a key, and the intruder should not know that key. Freshness means a key is unique to a session. You know, so Alice and Bob share a key in this session, and it's not used in any other session. Even any other session between Alice and Bob. Okay. In a group protocol, well, you don't really have this notion of a session. Closest thing to a session is the lifetime of the group itself, and many keys can be distributed in that one session, and principals can join and leave the group during a session. And you have to ask, how should the access to keys be limited? And how do these different secrecy requirements interact with each other? There's various secrecy requirements that describe what happens when a new member joins, when a member leaves, and you can even and you can put different restrictions on this. And although we didn't try to verify these requirements, we did model them, specify them in in-patrol. And then we found some interesting things when we did this, and that's my fun with PowerPoint. Okay, so we ran into secrecy. So we ran into some problems with secrecy. We also ran into some problems with freshness. As I said, you can no longer tie a key to a session. So what we did was we identified two types of freshness, and actually we looked at this problem before with two-party protocols, but it became much more sharp in these group protocols. And we had two notions of recency freshness, which means you accept the key that's generated most recently or if you, and let that be the current one. Or if you can't say, you usually can't say most recently, but you can say after a specific time. The other one is sequential freshness, in which you don't know if you have the most recent key, but you do know that the key you're accepting as new is more recent than the one you have.
This is where actually if you get timestamps, okay, you get a good
Yeah,
right?
yeah, then this would,
Timestamps.
Yeah.
So
yeah. Yeah, well, timestamps would give you recency freshness, but they wouldn't necessarily give you sequential freshness, because there may be a new key, another key out there with a later timestamp. And
But I can have different timestamps. I can have
Yeah.
timestamps that are only triggered only if I have a
Mhm.
join or leave group.
yeah, yeah,
Event.
yeah,
I can have many types of timestamps. I can use those.
yeah. But the thing is, for group key push datagrams, well, suppose, remember there's this intruder on the network. So suppose, the group, the GCKS sends out a group key push datagram, and then somebody else leaves or joins, so he sends out a new group key push datagram. And suppose the intruder sort of sits on these, and then he lets out one of the group key push datagrams, not the most recent, but the next to most recent. Then when you're getting that, you know that you're getting one that's newer than the one you've got, but you're not getting the most new one. Okay. And so that's why we needed to distinguish between recency and sequential. And that's why if you use timestamps, if you use timestamps, you would get a better notion of sequential. You would actually, I guess, yeah, I guess you would get a notion of recency freshness too, but you wouldn't know necessarily that you had the most recent one. So you would actually, if you're using timestamps, I think you would have to come up with sort of a third requirement there that's sort of between the two. So here's, and I'm not going to go, these are how these things look like when they're specified in Patrol. And this is recency freshness for the pull protocol that says if a member accepts key K via pull protocol, then either, well, I want to take into account the fact that pairwise keys can be stolen. So that's one case. If pairwise keys are stolen, then the intruder can do what he likes. The other one is that K shouldn't have expired previously to the request. You can't really require, it could have expired after the request, and there's not much you can do about that. But you can say that it shouldn't have expired previously to the request, because the nonces should guarantee that that whatever key is sent by the DCKS was sent after the request. And then here's, I'm not going to go into this, but then you can also specify sequential freshness for the protocol, and that can also be specified using in-patrol. Secrecy requirements became really nasty, because basically what you have is a bunch of different requirements, and these are actually taken from the GDOI document that you can actually sort of mix and match, and some of these are optional. Forward access control says principals shouldn't learn keys distributed after they leave the group. That's generally a good property that in most cases you want to have. Backwards access control means principals shouldn't learn keys that expired before they joined the group. And in some cases you might actually want this, like if you have some sort of subscription service, you might want this. On the other hand, you may have some sort of service in which, say, access to the service also gives you access, say, to the service's archives, in which case you may want to allow principals to get old keys. So you may or may not want to implement this. Perfect forward secrecy, okay, losing my, perfect forward, oh, come on. It's up here. Yeah. Doing this at an angle is sort of tough. Perfect forward secrecy says if a pairwise key is stolen, only keys distributed with that key after the stolen event should be compromised. And this is implemented with Diffie-Hellman because, you know, the idea is that Diffie-Hellman is that it provides secrecy against a passive intruder. So if you're, and authentication is provided by the master key or the pairwise key. So if the pairwise key is stolen, you could use that, the intruder could use that to do a man-in-the-middle attack on Diffie-Hellman, but no old if Diffie-Hellman changes could be compromised. And this is a little controversial because it's nice to have, but on the other hand, you have to use Diffie-Hellman to get it, and so it's an extra expense. And then there's other requirements that could govern the effects of, well, what happens if an intruder steals some key encryption keys and so forth. And so these are different requirements, most of them optional, and so you can mix and match, and you have to worry about how these interact with each other. So what we did was we developed a calculus of secrecy requirements, and we built a collection of in-patrol statements of events that could lead to key compromise. And then you could mix and match statements to get the requirements of your choice. And the only problem we had, of course, and we sat and scratched our heads about this and wrote a bunch of requirements and wrote them in patrol, and no matter which way you looked at it, they got really ugly. But one thing we found was, well, there's a nice graphical way of expressing these requirements in terms of fault trees. And what we did was, well, look at what we have. We have a description of sequences of events that should or should not lead up to some atomic event, such as accepting a key, learning a key, or so forth. And you can reason about sequences that should both happen, one or the other of which should have happened, or sequences which shouldn't happen. So you have and or not there. And so you can think of this as a fault tree. So you have, you know, some root, which is the event, your final event, such as accepting a key or learning a key. And then you have all these various and or not gates. And there you are. And so here's one of the more complex requirements. I'm not going to go into this in detail, but this is forward access control without perfect forward secrecy or backwards access control. And so this describes a lot of different conditions under which an intruder could learn a key. And some of them describe sort of failure events, such as the intruder actually learns the pairwise, intruder actually steals the key gets compromised. Others describe certain, the intruder, sort of legal events like intruder joining the group and what happens, you know, when he leaves, or what happens with the old keys. And this was, and then what we've done more recently is we used this at the time as just sort of a notation to help us, you know, figure out what we were talking about. And we've since approached this more formally and developed a particular fault tree language and an in-patrol semantics. Okay, so that takes care of everything we did. So what did we actually find out? Well, there were sort of three places where we found out stuff. One was specifying the protocol, one was specifying the requirements, and one was actually running the tool. And we found most of our bugs at the specification level, but as we progressed during the analysis, we would find fewer and fewer bugs, but they get more and more interesting. So I'll talk first about what we found when we were specifying the protocol. Well, we found some sort of minor omissions and ambiguities that were easily fixed. We found a major inconsistency. Sequence numbers were originally set in the key download payload and were only updated every time a new key encryption key was created. But that didn't account for the fact that some push messages might not contain new key encryption keys. They might contain only traffic encryption keys. and they would have the same, they would all have the same sequence number. And so how are you going to tell which is a new one? So now the sequence numbers are updated every time a new push message is sent, because what you really want to do is show that the push messages are fresh, not just the key encryption keys. Okay, some results of specifying the requirements. Well, this was the first problem we found with proof of possession. In the old version, principals only signed their own nonces, which meant if the pairwise key was compromised, you could just copy, an intruder could just copy this signed nonce and use it to impersonate a member. So now the first improvement we made was that principals now sign a hash of both their nonces, their own nonces and the other guy's nonces, which is sort of a more standard accepted way of doing challenging response. And we also found a detail that needed to be added to the group key pull protocol for it to satisfy sequential freshness. It left out the fact that you need to check the sequence number because it's possible that a member, let's say, suppose for some reason he initiated join two of these pull protocols with the GCKS, and responses got crossed in the mail. If he didn't check sequence numbers, he might wind up clobbering a new key with an old key, because he'll get one. Let's say the GCKS sends out one with a sequence number n, another with sequence number n+1. Let's say n+1 arrives first, and you accept it, and then if you get the one with sequence number n, unless you check, and if you accept that one, you're going to be actually deleting a newer key. So that was an easy fix to make.
When you run you write your requirements, you write everything, and you find your unreachable state, so now you have a problem. How do you use your analyzer to find out how to fix the problem?
It doesn't tell you how to fix the problem, but what you do is you look at the attack and see if there is some way it could.
So you try various things to try to avoid it. And try it again.
So now we're actually getting to the results of the analysis. And we found, and this was a really kind of subtle attack and kind of neat. And it actually made use of an ambiguity in the formatting of the protocol. And actually, we found two. One was using the NRL protocol analyzer, and another one we found that was suggested by the NRL protocol analyzer result. And I'll present the simpler attack here. And anyway, so the idea here is you have a dishonest group member who wants to trick other group members into accepting a fake key as a genuine one. And suppose that the protocol uses proof of possession. Well, here's what happens. So the idea is what the dishonest member does is he starts out and initiates the protocol. Okay, here it is, with the GCKS, and he says, "Here's my nonce," but he doesn't create a nonce. What he creates is a fake header, sequence number, and SA. Okay, and you would ask, well, why is he doing this? Well, he's going to try and fake a group key push message. But the GCKS, when he gets this, he's going to think this is a nonce. I mean, there's no way that you can check that something is a random number. There's no sort of formatting convention that says this is a random number. So what you have here is something he thinks is a random number. So the next thing that happens, the GCKS responds according to the rules of the protocol with his own nonce. The dishonest member responds according to proof of possession, so he signs this. The GCKS does his own proof of possession response, and what he's signing is, okay, I lost this again, use my finger. What he's signing is header prime, sequence prime, SA prime, and his own nonce. And now suppose the conditions on links and so forth are met, so that this thing is about the same size as a key download. Then this thing can be passed off as a group key push message, okay? Because it satisfies all the formatting conventions here. And then the dishonest member can use this and to send this out to the group and trick them to thinking that NR is a key here, is a new key. And so this could be a way of bamboozling the group into accepting something that is a key that's not. And the other attack is sort of symmetric to this and depends on the fact that the header begins with a random number, and the GCK, and here you have a dishonest principal impersonating a GCKS, and the attack sort of works the other way around. And so we did we tried to figure out what fix to this. Well, first of all, what we did was we had a discussion with the writers of GDOI to see if this thing really made sense, because it relies on some assumptions about various links of various parts of the message. It relies on an assumption on the GCKS of using the same signature key in the proof of possession and in the key distribution, and so they looked at all this and decided, yeah, this is a reasonable attack. This could happen, but the fix again was pretty easy, and actually it's sort of a standard technique which should have been done in the first place. That is, whenever you take a signature, you prepend to the signed data a tag saying what kind of signature it is. So it's either a GCKS proof of possession, a member proof of possession, or a group key push. So you have, and then the sort of type confusion attack is impossible. Okay, so our results of this were, okay, so at this point, we'd sort of finished our analysis, and the protocol at this point was ready to go on to the next step, as being what they call a request for comments. And so what we had, we'd identified a bunch of problems early on, and we'd fixed them, which made it a better protocol. It was also credited with speeding up acceptance of GDOI and the new multicast security working group that was formed to write and push through these new group key distribution protocols. And although we couldn't say, we have a proof of security, because we only had a proof of security of a certain high-level model, but it had mean that GDOI had gotten a much more systematic evaluation than most of these protocols get. So that really helped a lot. We also started to see interest from other parts of IETF in performing or applying formal analyses of various sorts. I mean, actually, one thing, not only the sort of high-level automated analyses, but also sort of more low-level cryptographic analysis. That's particularly been done for version 2. So we found, some interesting things to work on. Fault-free representation of requirements was one of them. Also, we've also been taking a closer look at these type confusion attacks and how can you detect vulnerability to these types of attacks, which actually turns out to be more a probabilistic argument. And at that point, you know, we sort of left it off. But recently, just a few months ago, we came back to this problem because I've been working with the Kestrel Institute on developing a somewhat higher level approach to analyzing crypto protocols that answers some of the problems and needs that I think arose at the NRL protocol analyzer analysis. I mean, in one case, we found a bunch of low-level stuff that required some really delicate modeling, but we also ran into another sort of bigger problem, which is that these tools generally don't support incremental analysis well, and that's often because the problems and the properties themselves are not really incremental properties. So even a minor change could require a complete re-verification. And as a result, we really only did a complete formal analysis of the system at only one stage. We spent a lot of time on writing and rewriting specification and writing and rewriting requirements, and until we felt that the thing was in really good shape, and then we did our analysis. But if you want to make changes after that, we would have had to do a whole new analysis, and it wasn't that easy doing the first analysis, and it would have been a major investment to do a new one. So what we wanted was something that's, well, sort of two things. One, it should be sort of consistent with methods used by protocol designers, so that your proof could sort of track a development. And that also supports this sort of incremental verification, so that if somebody makes a minor change, you don't have to go and redo it. So we've been working on this logic for crypto protocol analysis, and it deals with properties. It doesn't deal with all the types of properties and all the things you model that the NRL protocol analyzer does, but it does with an important subset. And the basic idea is you develop a set of axioms for deriving conclusions about protocol traces from message received by principals, most of these based on challenge and response. You also have a set of transformations you could apply to protocols, most of them having to do with sort of information that is attached to these challenge and responses. And this is sort of a very standard way that protocols are developed, and so that your logic sort of tracks this development. And also the logic provides a mean for composing proof. And we restrict ourselves to monotone properties in this incremental analysis and this compositional analysis, so you don't need to reprove anything when you add a new feature. And then we went back and looked at GDOI. And really all we wanted was we wanted a nice case study, and since, you know, I'd already done GDOI, it seemed like, well, we could do GDOI and compare it with, you know, the NRL protocol analyzer analysis. Okay. And one thing, well, found something with proof of possession. And the idea is, what really happened here is we'd missed a requirement in our original analysis. We missed the fact that, remember, in proof of possession, you're distributing these public keys and using these certificates. And one thing you find is, and one thing that was not really clear in some of the earlier documents was that these certificates contain new identities. They weren't attached to the identities that the GCKS and the member were using that were attached to their pairwise key. This was a brand new identity. And one of the goals of proof of possession was to, purposes of proof of possession was to prove not only that you knew the key, but that you were the possessor of this new identity that was attached to this key. We couldn't, when we tried to prove this, we couldn't. And as it turned out, the reason we couldn't was because there's an attack, and So here's the attack. And so suppose you have, and this relies on certain assumptions. You have a bad guy I for intruder, and he's an evil GCKS, and he's also a potential member. And there's another GCKS B whose group he could join, who he wants to join, but he doesn't have the proper credentials. So he wants to hijack somebody else's credentials. So he's going to hijack Alice's credentials here. So what he does is he gets Alice to try and join his group, and Alice sends her knots NI. Then I tries to join B's group, but he sends Alice's knots. He doesn't generate his own knots. Okay. Then B responds with his own knots NR prime, and I responds to Alice with B's knots NR prime. And then what he's going to get from Alice is a signature using the key in her certificate over NI and NR prime, and I can just pass that off to B. And then I will get the key. Now this attack depends on a lot of assumptions on on something that's optional in any way. So it wasn't a real showstopper, but it was serious enough. So you really had to think about what are you guaranteeing here, and what we actually wind up doing, what we're discussing now is instead of taking a hash over just NI and NR. You take a hash over the new identity. Let's see, is it the new identity? No, the old identity, as well. So what you have is basically this signature now becomes a way of saying, well, the new identity is saying that it owns the old identity, and since this proof of possession is authenticated with #3 here in the old key, it's also saying that the old identity is saying that it owns the new identity. So it's saying that they're the same. So and this is something that can be set up pretty straightforwardly in the logic. So conclusion is Verify's work is never done, I guess. And the other is, I think, we need more work on requirement solicitation for crypto protocols. Okay, so that ends the talk. Questions?
Questions?
Yeah.
Does the NPA, does it prove your protocol has properties exhaustively by checking every possible case, or does it simulate it for some amount of time and you cut it off and say, I haven't found an answer yet?
It does it for every possible case, because what you do is you prove a set of lemmas that limits the search space to a finite space, and then it searches that exhaustively. And the sort of thing it does is well, they're sort of like infinite loops that the intruder could get into, such as, for example, applying an arbitrary number of encryptions. And what the analyzer does is it allows you to prove lemmas that say, basically, there's no point in doing this. And if you prove enough of those lemmas, you wind up with a finite search space. It does a combination of that with symbolic model checking, and that turns out to be enough in most cases.
Any questions?
Yeah?
Do you know enough about the 802.11b flaws to know whether you're with
Yeah, I do. A lot of them, I think some of them depended on some properties of exclusive OR, which I could put into the NRL protocol analyzer, although that, or some of them I should say, depended on exclusive OR, that I could put into the NRL protocol analyzer, but would sort of be cheating, because you can't, it you can't really put a full description of the properties of exclusive bore. Although that's actually one of the problems we're working on now is being able to model these sort of more different sorts of problems. But actually, a lot of the problems in 802.11b you could have.
Any other questions? In terms of these incremental requirements, right? Okay, if I take the design point of view, when I try to design protocols, I try to write them in a way that they have some sort of aggregation, if you like, structure, because these are the tools I have to use as a designer. It helps me understand that. Is it the problem that this DOI does not have this structure? It doesn't follow sort of current techniques from specifying in software engineering tools, or what is it?
Well, it actually, GDOI they do pretty much follow that. I mean, what the designers generally do is they sort of start with a pattern, sort of a basic protocol, and then they build features onto it. I think, the problem, the really only place where the protocol encountered a lot of problems was this proof of possession, where they were sort of looking, and there it seemed to be a problem of they didn't really have a pattern, and we're trying to do something from scratch. So yeah, I guess in the answer that might. So I guess the answer would be yes. I mean, it helps if you have some sort of pattern that's been really analyzed to death, and people know what it's capable of doing.
I know the composition, and then I can try to take your logic or whoever's logic and try to do it at least pieces, and then whatever changes I can only take the part of the change. The whole thing.
In the core of NBA, when you start deducing from the final state, do you go using film proving, or you build the model and check it?
I guess we build the model on the fly. You sort of, you start at an insecure, and I should say that this tool, well, it was actually built, the original version was built some time ago, so it's a special purpose tool sort of built from scratch from Prolog. So what you do is you start from your end state, which is some insecure state, and then you use the state transitions to match outputs of the state transitions with your insecure state, and then whatever part of the state that didn't get matched plus the input of the transition become your old state, become your new state that you're going to try to find. So you have like, see, is there any chalk here? Yeah. Okay, so you're trying to find something here. You match part of it, and then what didn't get matched plus the input to your transition becomes the new thing you're trying to match. And then you just keep on building, working backwards and building this. And then at some point you may have a lemma that says, well, this state that you have to find, you're looking for, that we've proved that you can't get to that state, so cross it out and don't look any further. Or you may wind up at an initial state, in which case you're done.
Any other questions? Okay, let's time to speak again.